After the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, that's when Bill went to the steel. It is when I left the cleaners where I first got a job in '52. And I began to float at different jobs that wanted a female in the office.
At the steel?
No, I didn't go to the steel at first. I went to the Bell Telephone needed a receptionist. I went to that for that job, and they told, well, the job's filled. Well, you know, it was at ACP, so I know about all the gimmicks. You know, it hadn't been filled. They just didn't want anybody black at that level. So I stayed there to become a telephone operator, which I later resigned from. I was very careful to resign from the job rather than quit, so that whoever came along behind me would be able, if they wanted that job, they could. We laugh about that today, about plugging, you know. Yeah, and then there was a place in Allentown, it's a battery place, that needed someone to work in the office, a female, and the union said the next person in had to be an African American. I took that job. I stayed there about 11 years or so. And then that's when I came back to Bethlehem, because the kids were younger and I wanted to be closer if they needed me at school as a mother. That was my mother hat. So then I got a job at the steel. We set up, these were exciting times, you know, for us as board members. You know, we sat down, deliberated over things, and you know, we took things to task. You know, if you believed in something, we stood and worked for it. Absolutely. Yeah, that was Bethlehem's, I think it was the first strike.
The teacher strike?
Yeah.
What about any buildings developed at that time?
I think, yes, the one building that I kind of objected to the location was the Dunnigan. I thought, you know, they could have done a better job of found a better location than to put a school building on a hill. You know, I think the means and what we were trying to achieve, you know, with the South Side and with the lower income kids, but why in the hell do we have to put the building on a hill? Yeah, so it was that building, and I said to them when they put the plaque up, I said, don't put my name on it. That's how, but I'm that kind of person, you know, I'm a principled person. I was then, and I still am. And I will protest, you know, as I did, you know, many days for the Martin Luther King holiday. As you know, this district was, you know, hard-headed. We're hard-headed about many things. You know, issues that came up. I can remember standing in front of the school with our NAACP constituents, you know, over issues. That I think it was DeLucio that came out and he said, "Oh, come in." And Lewis, it was a cold day. I should have gone in because I was cold, but the principle of it was we were there for a purpose. I said, "No, thank you. We'll stay here till we're ready to go."
What do you feel is your biggest accomplishment?
The holiday. We got the holiday, but moreover, today still, you know, education still, you know, troubles me. You know, we've had this COVID that came in 2019, and you know, and it can't be helped. But there are people with strong feelings about not taking the vaccinations, which have complicated the problems. It's complicated learning. I've talked with Dr. Roy, and you know, I'm concerned about kids that have missed these 2 years, 2.5 years of education. They'll not get that back. And where will they find their place in life to get a decent job? You know, in the day when I came out of school, you know, there were more manual type office jobs, which is what I was seeking, and that was even unheard of in the 50s when I came out. But it'll be even less, and I'm talking about minority kids, African Americans specifically. There won't be anything there for them. If you aren't technical and don't have some kind of goals behind you and some skill, you know, and they talk about crime, you know, it lends itself to crime. So we have to, you know, I think we're still in that dilemma. Maybe that's why I'm still alive. You know, it is 50 years. I'm 88 years old. So, you know,
What about some of the opportunities that,
there was nobody of color, an African American, on school board leading to it when I came forward. You know, I had family that had gone to college and come back and applied at the school district for employment, and their applications more or less were just, you know, placed in the trash. And so, even as I served the 6 years, looked around and asked others if they'd be interested, there was no interest. And then when Winston came along, I said, I'd call his name out at a Martin Luther King program. And Winston, you're in line. Come on, get with it. People have to feel that you're the person, you know, to work with you. You know, we had built up a relationship. I had built up a relationship unknowingly with my mothers, or fellow mothers, and, you know, over in the area. You know, I had you know, like family, like parties for, you know, PTA parties at the house, which was unheard of because, you know, there weren't many white folks who went into black houses, that kind of thing, you know. But I built up a relationship with them in leadership, and, you know, they appreciated that. And I guess none of us had a lot of money, you know. My husband and I both worked. I've always worked, and was able to do what I needed to do. But, you know, maybe I had more stamina than others. I don't know, I still do.
Clearly.
what you think the students have here in Bethlehem?
But listen, there many students, you know, many opportunities, really. And our Bethlehem School District has offered the best, and we continue to do that. That's why I feel, even at this stage in my life, and having been a former school board member, I still go in the community, strive and work to better situations. I watch the companies and everybody's generating information that students may further their learning. That's important. And I'll continue to do that until, you know, who calls me. I don't know who called first.
So my family is not from Bethlehem. So when people ask, how did you become so involved in Bethlehem? How did you get to the Boys and Girls Club? That's one very long story. My family moved here in 2001 from Shreveport, Louisiana. When we moved here, we lived on the corner of 5th and Atlantic Street, and then later that year moved to Pierce Street. And being in South Bethlehem, we did a lot of our activities at Yosco Park, and later on at the Boys and Girls Club. So being there and being involved in activities just kind of made that happen. Just kind of was a natural progression. And, you know, moving here, my sister and I went to Brocco. My brothers were at Dunnigan. At that time, Dunnigan was at Rosemont Elementary. So we were able to get a taste of Bethlehem very quick in our first year. After I went from Brocco to Freedom, class of 2005, I went off to Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania. While I was at Freedom, you know, our school district requirement of doing your 60 hours. I did it at the Boys and Girls Club. Thoroughly enjoyed what I did. I was a front desk greeter, and I helped with homework in the homework room. And that, they saw something within me to say, hey, we could take this kid on. So April of 2003 is when I got hired for the first time. And from that, every summer of my life, I worked for the summer program, and both at the day camp and at Yosco Park. And those experiences that I had at the Boys and Girls Club kind of put a fire within me to say, I really want to work with young people. I've always thought I would do something with like education or kids. Like when I was really young, I wanted to be a teacher. All throughout high school, I wanted to be a teacher. And when I got to college, those experiences kept harkening back to me. And I said, I really want to work in that. So I got a degree in developmental psychology, and I worked at Kids Peace for a little bit. After Kids Peace, I worked at the Hispanic Center. At that time, was just transitioning from the Spanish Council, and I was doing youth programming for them. And then opportunity came for me to work back at the club, and I've been here ever since. The school board came about because I was approached by a couple folks in the district that said, hey, this opportunity is coming. We really think that you should apply. When I was approached about it, I thought it was very significant, and the first person I called when I found out about it was Esther Lee, because I knew that she had been elected to do so. So she was the first African American person to be elected. My mother-in-law also ran for school board I want to say back in the early 1980s. So right after Mrs. Lee's departure from the board. She didn't make it, but so I had those folks within my circle. And I said, well, what do you think? What's the time crunch, or what is the time commitment and all of that? But my love of kids, and in particularly my time working at Brockwell Middle School, really gave me an eye-opening view of how our school system works. And one of my passions was like, how are we communicating this to the everyday parent? And then how are the needs of the everyday parent getting communicated? Because when you work in any institution, school, church, box factory, whatever it is, you know your jargon, you know your people, so you do that. And you talk about that. How do we make sure we're talking box factory stuff to the people who aren't working in the box factory? And so that was like, oh yes, I'll do this. Talked with Dr. Roy a little bit. He's like, I think you would be a good person. I came and did, I enjoyed it so much. My initial plan wasn't even to stay, was just to do the end of Roy Ortiz's term. And which he was the other person I called him, like, hey, they want me. He's like, I know, I told them to go. The experiences I had said, hey, I'll run. And so I actually ran. I really enjoy the opportunity to learn about policy and to really, explain to folks, this is what your tax dollars are doing and this is what your schools are doing. So I've enjoyed every bit of it, but that's how I got there. I think it's important to have a diverse school board because Bethlehem is diverse. I mean, even outside of looking at racial and ethnic makeup or racial makeup, the ethnic makeup of Bethlehem almost since the beginning of the incorporation, certainly for South Bethlehem, has always been ethnically diverse. And so to have that sort of representation, I think, is thoroughly important. I'm a product of the love and support of my community of South Bethlehem, but also significantly of the African American community here in Bethlehem. And from that, I learned a lot about folks. So recently, our community lost Constance Roberts, first black teacher hired by the district. Not the first qualified teacher to apply to work in our district. We had folks as early as in 1940. We had even folks earlier than that. Mrs. Milana Wingo, who was a teacher in Georgia back in the 1920s. When she and her husband relocated here after the Great Migration, she couldn't get a job. She ended up becoming a seamstress. Same thing with another woman, Mabel Kelly, was a teacher in Virginia, moved up here, lived over on Linden Street. All of her kids graduated from Liberty or Bethlehem High, whichever way you want to call it, was a teacher in Virginia. She couldn't become a teacher here. So these were folks that predated even Esther Lee, predated Constance Roberts, that had the intellect, but not the ability. And I always like to make that distinction because a lot of people, when they hear, well, why are we celebrating these significances? What do they matter? Nobody was able to do it before. That's not true. You had people who were able, who had the ability, but just because of the times, they weren't acceptable, they weren't accepted. So for me to be part of that lineage, I'm glad to do that and to be one who can open the gate for others. I can't wait till we see, so many other people of different ethnic backgrounds, of different racial makeup to come and represent their children and their communities, their neighborhood, their neighbors on the board. We've had that history. I'm glad to continue it.